So thank you for being here, Dr. Duke. We'll jump right into our questions today. Can you please give us an idea of the threats that we face both in Kootenai County, where we both live, and across the nation? And when you do so, what are some of the key threat vectors that we should be aware of?
It's really interesting, Michael. Thank you for interviewing me. I really appreciate this time because I think it's a real critical time. We've been very fortunate in the United States to very live a very comfy, comfortable, easy lifestyle. We've always been able to have other people take care of our needs. There's always been first responders because we've had very few issues. But as time has gone on, we've started to realize that the global issues are starting to hit our shores and they're starting to become an issue. And so I think for us to assume that the future is going to be the same as the past, could really put us into a position of vulnerability. And I'm trying to reduce the risk of vulnerability. And all anyone would have to do is just, some people, the way they approach news and the way they approach the world is, oh, let me just hide. And I don't want to think about bad things. And so, man, that's yucky or that's horrible or whatever term they use. I don't want to think of bad stuff. But you know what? As maturity and as adult, we have to say, hey, there are some things that could happen, and I should be prepared. I might not. I want to think beyond myself, not just my own self or my family, but how about my neighbors? Do I have some elderly people in the neighborhood who might need help if something happened? Well, anyone who's listening to this, all you'd have to do is just kind of Google some of the things that are occurring in our nation, and they're starting to hit our shores. We all know if someone would just take a Google search on basically what's going on with our infrastructure as far as the grid is concerned, there's tons of articles talking about it's ancient, it's old, it's vulnerable, it's not protected, and we also know that there are a lot of undocumented individuals who are crossing the border, and a lot of us would like to think that yes, it's all families and they all have good intentions in mind and they just want to have a nice future and a nice life. But and that's true of many of them. But we also know that among the millions, all it would take is 10 bad people, 10 terrorists, 10 individuals who knew who had bad intent and went for our electric grid and said, let me just blow up a few plants or let me take on a nuclear power plant. Boy, we would be immediately devastated, and it would take weeks and years to be able to recover from something like that. So we can't be in that mode anymore, that thinking that the future is the same as the past, or that our first responders can handle 180,000 people in Kootenai County. I mean, it's time to step up and say, let's be prepared.
I like the way you mentioned that we can't expect that the future will be like the past. It's a good way to frame this. My second question is, for those that don't already know, can you describe a scenario in which a crisis could unfold here and what could negatively occur, especially to our most vulnerable citizens from a health standpoint?
Well, let me take the example of a grid going down as a matter of fact. And when I was a young a child, I joined the Cub Scouts and then the Boy Scouts, and the motto was to be prepared. And anyone who's lived in Southern California, I'm a native here, but I lived in Southern California for a while, and everybody knew that you were the message of be prepared. There could be an earthquake at any time that could affect millions. Well, all we're doing is talking about doing this at a little bit of a bigger scale, rather than just ourselves. But let's just take the grid, for example. If that grid were shut down, those aren't pieces that are sitting down at your hardware store. I mean, depending upon the grid vulnerability, it might take years for it to come back. Well, just have the person listening for just a minute think about this concept for a second. Our whole society runs on electricity. So so take that step further. You wake up and there's nothing turns on in your house. Your refrigerator goes bad. All of your food is spoiled within a day or two. What are you going to eat? Are you going to get in your car and drive down to the store? Well, the store refrigerators are out. There's everything's melting on the floor. And by the way, you better not drive very much because all of the pumps to pump gasoline are not going to work because they're dependent upon electricity. And how are the trucks going to deliver gasoline to your local gas food or your local gas station? I mean, if the refineries are all down. I mean, so all you have to do is take that concept a little bit beyond yourself and realize, wow, I better have several days of food and supplies available. And so the most vulnerable above us, if we know friends or relatives or neighbors who are elderly who might not have the money to be able to have, a week or two of food in advance or supplies, or if they're very dependent upon medications like diabetics and insulin, that you're not going to, if the pharmacies aren't able to, have those medications coming in on a regular basis, which if there is a power failure, they won't, then it won't take long for people to start, not doing well or dying. And so I'm not trying to. We've been exposed to so much fear, but and I don't want to go down that pathway. What I'm trying to do is go down the pathway of heading off fear by being prepared, so that if something happened, people could say, "Hey, listen, I don't need to panic. I'm prepared."
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. We're not trying to stoke fear. We're trying to make people aware, as you mentioned, to be prepared, right? If you're prepared, then you don't have to be fearful. Let me go to my next question. So, what should regular citizens do to prepare themselves health-wise for whatever crisis or emergency could soon arise?
Well, the smartest thing they can do, a lot of people have a tendency to think, oh, well, I'll take care of myself later, or I'll get around to that diet January 1st of 3 years from now, or whatever. But the smartest thing you can do is be least dependent upon medications than you are right now. And there's a lot of medications that can be removed from somebody's life if they would change and truly eat, the appropriate anti-inflammatory diet. If they can truly remove those things from their life that are negative to their health, and the more you do so, the less medications you become dependent upon, and then the freer you become as a healthy individual. So that's something that they can do right now from a health standpoint. And I spend a lot of my time helping people be taken off of medications, but they've got to make changes in order for me to help them do that.
Okay, let's go to our next question here. Why is it so important that our community band together at this time, no matter our partisan affiliations, no matter how we feel politically? Politically.
Yeah, in a time of crisis, you're not going to care about somebody's politics. I mean, there's a famous phrase of war that there are no atheists in the foxhole. I mean, in other words, when you've got a common enemy, whoever is next to you that is even close to being on your side, you want to rally with them. And so you don't want to have the framework of mind of saying, well, I don't care about anybody else in the county. All I want to do is grab my guns and go down to the store and make sure my family's taken care of. Well, that's a very short-lived mentality. The smartest thing we can all do is take a deep breath and say, hey, listen, we've endured some tough things in the history of our country, and we don't have to panic. We don't have to look upon our neighbor as the enemy, but instead, our neighbor is our friend. That we all have gifts and talents that they don't have, and they have gifts and talents that we don't have. And so that if we combine those and balance them together and say, let's take a deep breath, let's survive for a few days, and then let's go to like some central location where we can get some additional help from people that are also prepared in advance, like this K-Search group. That's what we want. That's going to help everybody. So in essence, your neighbor is not your enemy; they're your friend, and that's the way we should look upon it.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, in the last few decades, we've thought of ourselves first as Republicans or Democrats or whatever our political affiliation. We have to remember that we are Americans, most and
Absolutely.
all. My next question is, how can Kootenai County, where we both live, better prepare now so that we don't end up in the nightmare situation that Maui just endured?
It's really kind of interesting, and New Orleans, et cetera. I mean, I think a lot of for a lot of major cities that were overwhelmed, there wasn't preparation in advance. It was the future will always be like the past, and that's why there ends up being a lot of unnecessary disease and death and problems. Whereas if instead of one of the key things we can do is just not panic, and what helps us to not panic is to be prepared, educated, knowledgeable, and to think through these things on yourself, or to seek out resources. We want to be able to provide resources to people where we can say, well, maybe it's time to consider on your that extra bedroom closet. Maybe put in some extra money into canned food or staples that so that if something happens, you don't have to. If you've got a little bit of land, maybe consider growing some of your own food, or having chickens or rabbits, or something that you can do so that you've thought ahead of the game, having extra batteries, maybe having some ways to recharge batteries from with solar panels, or et cetera, et cetera. Every person has to think through these things on their own, and there's plenty of resources to get help, but you have to be willing to take that step of, hey, I don't know anything, where can I get help? Well, there's plenty of help available if people would just make that step.
100%. And that's why we're so engrossed in making a proactive effort to deal with these challenges here. So, why do you recommend that people who are medication dependent, for instance, diabetics needing insulin, stock up on their meds now?
Because if everybody waits until it happens and said, "Oh, I better go down and get some to make sure," none may be available. And I think the smartest thing is that if to speak with your doctor, see if they would be able to write a prescription, or even if you've got a life-saving critical medication like antiarrhythmics or insulin or EpiPens, just to see if your doctor will write for something, even if your insurance won't cover it, to pay for it with cash. I mean, it would be better to have out of pocket money available, because if there's a real difficult time period and you can't get it, then there's nowhere else to go, and it'll be on you. And so that's why. Again, I'm not going down the avenue of fear. I'm going down the avenue of preparation.
Yes, absolutely. It's better to have it and not need it than the opposite. So, because of your background and your medical expertise, what are your top tips for boosting one's health, no matter what may come?
It's so interesting. I actually wrote a book a number of years ago that has almost 900 scientific references, and the point behind it is, and I'm not selling the book. What I'm trying to do is make there's a major point. There's a ton of science behind this. The chronic excessive inflammation underlies all chronic disease. And so we have resources available about how you can reduce inflammation and what it is. And a lot of our foods are inflammatory that we eat every day. And a lot of things that we've been told are healthy are inflammatory. And a lot of the most inflammatory foods are incredibly cheap. If we reduce inflammation in every aspect of our life, not just in our diet, which I think is where 70% of it comes into our body, but if we reduce inflammation by our lifestyle, by exercise, one of the benefits of exercise, and you don't have to join a gym, just walking. If you walk 30 minutes, that's anti-inflammatory. I mean, there's all of the good things that you know to do are anti-inflammatory. Smoking's inflammatory, not smoking's anti-inflammatory. Drinking alcohol is inflammatory, not drinking alcohol is anti-inflammatory. So when you realize your enemy is inflammation and you reduce it, then what that does is that decreases disease risk, and need of medications. That's like number one. Number two is fear. You got to fight fear. You got to run away from fear, because fear, believe it or not, is inflammatory. Okay, so when people get into that reaction of, oh no, I'm going to die, that's incredibly inflammatory. You're making all kinds of decisions you shouldn't be making. And so instead of, you have to resist the fear and calm down and say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Let me take a deep breath. I'm going to be fine. And so, anxiety is inflammatory, all of these things. But see, we can reduce a lot of it. We have control a lot of inflammation if we know where it is, what it is, its sources, and what we can do to reduce it.
And I like what you said just there at the end about the importance of control. We have control over our lives. We don't have to eat those kinds of foods. We can exercise more. And I would add one more thing: get off the screens as much as you can. Go out and be in nature. I think that would help with
Oh,
health as
yeah.
well.
Oh absolutely. In fact, but we we measured caloric intake in thousands of people at a program that I was at. And the average person, calorically, they go down to like 1,100, 1,200, 300 a day, calories a day if you're just laying in bed doing nothing. Okay. Believe it or not, it goes below that if you watch TV for hours, because literally the screens think for you, and a lot of those calories are being used by your brain. So the screens think for you, and so you're actually the least calorie consuming activity you can do, participate in, is watching TV because it's thinking for you.
Yes, in more ways than one. So how can a spiritual practice help one's physical health, especially when crises emerge?
One thing that I was surprised to find out when I worked for this multi-billion-dollar company and I would speak all over the world, I found that there was research to show that people who had a committed religious faith had better health. And there's a lot of research on this, but hardly anybody knows it because the mainstream media doesn't promote it. And the research doesn't tell you what to believe. It wasn't like, oh, only this particular religion, are you going to have health benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And I literally was on stages all over the world and taught this from every religious country that you can imagine. And I've spoken on 30 different countries. I'd stand on stage and say, the literature, scientific literature doesn't tell you what to believe, but believe it intently, because people who believe intently had lower heart disease, lower cancer, lower anxiety, lower hypertension, all kinds of health problems are reduced. And then other people look back and say, oh, no, it's not the spiritual aspect, it's the being part of a group and all that stuff. Well, they did research to try to sort all of that out and found out that no, the benefit doesn't come from just being in a group. There's something spiritual that impacts our lives, and it's important to latch onto that.
100%. And my final question to you is this. For those who aren't familiar with K-Surge, what is it and why does it matter?
It's a group of talented people who said, you know what, we want to reach out to our neighbor, we want to reach out to our relatives, we want to reach out to our friends, our community. It's a community oriented group, not political in any way, shape, or form. It's saying, we think we see enough signs on the wall that there could be some bad things coming. And we don't want to sit here and do nothing and then try to scramble it all together when something bad happens. And so, do we hope nothing bad happens? Absolutely. I hope that I live to be 110 and nothing bad has happened. But I don't want to live a fairy tale either. And so, it's a group of individuals who have expertise in all kinds of different fields, who come together and we've formed committees to be able to reach out to the broader group so that if something difficult happens, we'd be able to assemble and help our community at a larger scale. And the degree to which we can help will be the degree to which the community gets involved and volunteers and becomes part of our meetings, part of what we're doing, and joining committees. And absolutely, we could take care of the whole county if enough people get involved.
That is a wonderful way to end it. I want to thank you for your expertise and for your time today. We really appreciate it, Dr. Duke.
Thanks so much, Michael. Great to be with you.
Thank you.